Hello and welcome to Sungrown Stories Season 1, Episode 9. I'm your host, Alexandria Irons, founder of Queen of the Sungrown. And I just want to say thank you guys so much for the support. The last few weeks have been pretty crazy for me. I moved into my new farm, the Bad Seed Farm. Go ahead and follow us on Instagram. And since then, it's been a whirlwind of preparing the garden sites, making sure Blaze participants have got their seeds, unpacking. And in the midst of all of this, I was in a car accident, not once, but twice, with the second one resulting in a woman just actually driving straight into me, pinning me between her vehicle and the back of mine. So needless to say, I have had a ton of extra stuff going on. So I apologize for my lack of episodes, but I want to say amazing job and thank you. Big shout out to Cat Lady for keeping it going while I was literally under the weather. Anyway, just wanted to catch up and let you guys know if you hadn't seen what was happening. I post on my Instagram most regularly. I'm getting back into the swing of things on YouTube every Thursday night at 5 Pacific Standard. So come on, join. I love teaching, educating, and just getting out more content about organic, ecological, and holistic gardening. So, without further ado, let's dive into this next episode. I'm super excited for episode 9, which is explosive growth. This episode is all about nitrogen and nutrient management of nitrogen. So, since it's the most focused nutrient during vegetative growth, I figured this would be a perfect time to just extrapolate and really get into the nitty-gritty of the nitrogen cycle, how it occurs in nature, how our plants take it up, nitrogen deficiencies, toxicities, ways we can feed our soil and plants, as well as the ecological impact of overuse of nitrogen, a little bit of the differences between synthetic and organic forms of nitrogen. So it's going to be all about nitrogen today. And we have amazing guest, the soil doctor, Bryant. He is just a wealth of knowledge. If you guys don't know him, follow him on Instagram, check out his website, thesoildoctorconsulting.com. And we had an amazing conversation, heavily focused on nitrogen. So we'll get into that. But let's just sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
Let's take a quick break for a word from our sponsors.
Welcome to the most affordable path to organic gardening excellence, brought to you by Queen of the Sungrown. Today, we spotlight an age-old secret embraced by gardeners worldwide, now made more accessible than ever: yucca root extract powder. Envision your garden not just surviving, but flourishing, even under the harshest sun. Thanks to yucca root extract, this dream is within reach. Derived from the resilient yucca plant, native to the arid regions of southwestern North America, our yucca root extract powder becomes an indispensable ally for your garden. Why yucca? Its myriad of benefits speaks volumes. It's your garden's shield against heat stress, ensuring plants remain vibrant and productive. It's a natural enhancer for nutrient uptake, making every drop of water and nutrient count. It transforms your soil, encouraging healthy growth and aeration. And it acts as a gentle yet effective pest deterrent, safeguarding your garden naturally. The secret isn't just in the plant, but in making it available to all. The saponins in yucca act as natural surfactants, facilitating critical water and nutrient absorption, while its biopesticidal properties offer a sustainable solution to keeping pests at bay. With Queen of the Sungrown, yucca's full potential is unlocked, bringing unparalleled resilience and vigor to your garden. Transform your gardening practice with the most affordable yucca root extract powder on the market. Exclusively for our listeners, use code SUNGROWN for 20% off your first order. Experience the transformative power of yucca today. Your garden will show its gratitude. Visit us at queenofthesungrown.com to discover more and claim your special offer. Queen of the Sungrown. Harness the affordable power of yucca root and watch your garden thrive. Let's begin with a basic question. What is nitrogen? Okay. Nitrogen is a chemical element with the symbol N and atomic number 7. It's a non-metal that is colorless, odorless, and generally inert, making up about 78% of the Earth's atmosphere by volume. Nitrogen is a crucial component of all living cells, as it is a fundamental part of amino acids, proteins, and nucleic acids, including DNA and RNA. In its gaseous form, nitrogen is diatomic, meaning each molecule consists of 2 nitrogen atoms, N2. This diatomic molecule is very stable and non-reactive due to the strong triple bond that holds the atoms together, which makes it relatively inert at atmospheric temperatures. In order for plants and animals to utilize nitrogen, it must first be converted into a more reactive form, such as ammonia, nitrate, or nitrite. And this happens through natural processes like nitrogen fixation or human activities such as the production of fertilizers. Now, this conversion is a critical part of the nitrogen cycle, a vital ecological system that circulates nitrogen through the biosphere and atmosphere. Nitrogen is also used industrially in the manufacture of fertilizers, explosives, and plastics, among other things. So, when I am learning specifically about nutrient management for a particular element, such as nitrogen, I really like to explore the way that specific nutrient cycles through the natural world. Now, this naturally occurring cycle is called a biogeochemical cycle. If you have a background in environmental, natural science, ecology, you're probably well familiar with these terms, biogeochemical cycle. Every single element on the planet in the periodic table has its own natural cycle through Earth. And being able to understand how these minerals move through Earth is going to give you a better understanding of how to, I don't want to say manipulate, but use them for your garden, for your health. It's just, the more you know, the more you grow. I say it once, I'll say it again. So nitrogen has an incredibly unique journey through Earth. Well, I think all kinds of things are fascinating. So I hope you find this as unique and interesting as I do. Basically, the nitrogen cycle, remarkable ecological process that transforms nitrogen across different chemical forms that makes it usable for all forms of life on Earth. Now, this cycle begins with the vast pools of nitrogen gas in the atmosphere. Remember, it's inert and not directly usable by most organisms. So, through a process called nitrogen fixation, specialized bacteria in the soil and water convert this gas into ammonia, which the environment then converts into nitrites and nitrates. These forms are readily absorbed by plants, forming the foundation of the food web by synthesizing nitrogen into building blocks of life, such as amino acids, proteins, and DNA. Now, one thing that I think, one specific instance of this initial cycle that I just find most fascinating is in ecological successions, we have primary, secondary, we have an order that ecosystems evolve. So whenever there's some kind of like disturbance, such as a forest fire, an earthquake, landslide, or man-made like building a road, cutting away part of a hillside, putting in a fence, grading removing topsoil, disturbing an ecosystem. Anytime there is some kind of significant disturbance, we see primary species move in. So primary species are bacteria that fix nitrogen. Now, why would they do this? Well, nitrogen is essential for plant life, for all life to grow, right? And if you remove all of your plant life through either a forest fire and it's devoid of life, what do you need? You need to get nitrogen back into that ecosystem to grow plants, to feed animals, to create more organic waste, to then provide more food for secondary species. So we start out after like a forest fire. Let's just go with a forest fire. Wipes out all of the trees, and then we start seeing grasses and legumes come up. One of the first species to pop up, at least where I'm at in the West Coast, all up and down California, all the way up to where I am now, almost to the Canadian border. Um, lupins. Lupins, the beautiful purple, blue, I think they come in pink as well, flowers that are they're legumes. They have this relationship with rhizobia, the specific type of bacteria that fixes nitrogen from the atmosphere into root nodules. So the primary species, this advantageous species that comes in and pulls nitrogen from the atmosphere after a disturbance and starts building that. It's the building blocks of life, right? That's what nitrogen does. That's what nitrogen is. And it's the beginning of growth. When we need that explosive growth, lots of vegetation, we need nitrogen. And so one of the first instances of this cycle, right? We talk about this, the cycle of pulling from the atmosphere naturally occurs in disturbances. And so anytime you're like driving along and you see like a cliffside where there might not be a lot of vegetation, look for these species, look for lupins, look for legumes, road cuts, forest fires, earthquakes, landslides, etc. And you'll see these advantageous, opportunistic species that come in and help build life for secondary transitions of ecosystems. Very, very interesting to me. So animals participate in this cycle. So we've got the legumes and the rhizobia bacteria pulling atmospheric nitrogen out, fixing it into the root nodules. Those plants die, feed the soil, or they're consumed by animals. So animals consume the plants, further integrating nitrogen into their own biological processes. After organisms excrete waste or die, decomposers like more bacteria and fungi break down this organic matter, returning nitrogen to the soil as ammonia in a process known as ammonification. This ammonia can be used again by plants, or it can undergo nitrification where it's converted back into nitrates by soil bacteria. In the final stage known as denitrification, other types of bacteria convert these nitrates back into nitrogen gas, releasing it into the atmosphere, thus completing the cycle. So, this intricate dance of transformations not only sustains the vast diversity of life on our planet, but it also highlights the delicate balance needed to maintain ecosystems. Now, lightning also plays a fascinating and powerful role in the nitrogen cycle, acting as a natural facilitator of nitrogen fixation. So, during a lightning strike, the intense energy and heat of lightning, which can exceed temperatures of 30,000 Kelvin, roughly about 53,540 degrees Fahrenheit, but who's counting? Breaks the strong triple bonds of nitrogen gas molecules in the atmosphere. So when these nitrogen molecules are split, they can quickly react with oxygen in the air, forming nitrogen oxides such as nitric oxide and nitrogen dioxide. Now, these nitrogen oxides are then carried to the earth by rainwater in a process known as atmospheric deposition. Once deposited into the soil, these compounds are converted by microorganisms into nitrate. So, in a previous nutrient episode, I discussed nutrient mobility. And that is the tendency for minerals to move throughout either soil, water, or the plant. Now, nitrogen has an incredibly high mobility in all three. And because of this, it can be cycled rather quickly. So, this can lead to a wide range of issues for our plants, as well as ecological issues. And this can range from nitrogen toxicity in our waterways, known as eutrophication, to deficiencies when natural cycles get thrown out of whack. So, nitrogen toxicity and deficiencies are one of the most common I see in gardens because it's high mobility in water. It can easily leach out of your media, and it's also highly mobile in your plant. So it'll be transferred from old growth to new growth, making it one of the easiest nutrient problems to identify visually, which also gives you that opportunity to manage nitrogen more easily than other nutrients. So, most of the nitrogen found in organic fertilizers is slowly released as it's broken down by microorganisms. And this is because it's bound by carbon in amino acids. Whereas synthetic nitrogen fertilizer, like urea, is immediately available. At the turn of the century, the world's natural reserves of Chile saltpeter, which were then a primary source of nitrogen for fertilizer, were depleting rapidly. So, without sufficient nitrogen, crops couldn't grow effectively, and without crops, the specter of mass starvation loomed large. Enter Fritz Haber, a German chemist with a vision that was as audacious as it was scientific. Nitrogen, despite its abundance in the atmosphere, is inert and not usable by plants directly. So, Haber's goal was to fix atmospheric nitrogen by converting it into a form that plants could absorb. Haber developed a process that did just that. It fixed nitrogen by synthesizing ammonia from nitrogen and hydrogen gas under conditions of high temperature and pressure, facilitated by an iron catalyst. Now, remember that iron catalyst, we're going to talk about that a little bit later. So, this reaction, simple yet profound in its implications, became the first successful method to synthetically fix nitrogen. However, while Haber had solved the chemical equation, turning this process into a practical large scale operation presented another daunting challenge. This is where Carl Bosch, an engineer at BASF, Bosch, I think, I don't know, you guys, I'm terrible at pronouncing things. I think it's Bosch actually, because I have a Bosch dishwasher. Okay, so he was an engineer at BASF. He stepped in and Bosch took Haber's benchtop experiment and transformed it into an industrial reality, overcoming tremendous technical hurdles related to materials and pressures used in the process. The physical and chemical conditions necessary for the Haber process were extreme, and scaling them up required innovations in high pressure technology and catalysis, whatever. The collaboration of Haber's chemistry and Bosch's engineering expertise culminated in the Haber-Bosch process, a method that could produce ammonia on an industrial scale implemented just before the World War. Now, this innovation not only changed the nature of warfare, providing Germany with sources of nitrates for explosive, but more profoundly, it altered the course of agriculture worldwide. Now, nitrogen fertilizer was discovered as a chemical warfare explosive. I wonder back to, I mean, it had to have been in his mind when he was considering this, the impact, the lightning, and how that fixes and transforms nitrogen. And if he was mimicking that explosive energy, I'm not sure, but either way, this changed things huge drastically, right? I mean, they produced a ton of nitrate explosives, and those leftover explosives were then used as fertilizer. And I think that it's important to note. Let's go back to that iron chelating agent. Sorry, guys, I'm terrible at pronouncing things. The iron chelating agent that's used to make synthetic nutrients available, right? Iron EDTA. Now, this synthetic catalyst is harmful for bacteria. And so while I understand that when you're considering starvation and um, running out of fertilizer with a world population that's growing exponentially, trying to come up with ways to resolve this problem results in, like, how do we make a fertilizer? How do we solve this problem? And that's kind of what we're doing with this synthetic fertilizer. So it's this iron chelating agent that is an antimicrobial. And so you're then, using an agent that is limiting or being detrimental to the natural way that nitrogen is cycled through the earth by harming microbial life. And so that's just one reason why I prefer organics, because of the ecological impacts that synthetic things, man-made things can have. And the consequences are far reaching, and pretty much everything we do has some sort of impact. And this is why I teach holistic and ecological gardening, because most of us just don't know. We don't know. And it's okay to not know it. And that's what I'm here for. And that's what other people are learning, studying, and sharing this information, because most of you don't want to kill bacteria or bees or fish in waterways, which is a huge impact of synthetic nitrogen that is completely available, that can wash out and get into our waterways. So the name, I had a great conversation. Let's just bring in the soil doctor, and we talked about all of this and see what he has to say, because we discuss the importance of soil testing and the proper application of minerals, including nitrogen. So, without further ado, please welcome Bryant, the soil doctor.
Absolutely. And just to see that the soil test is one tool in the toolbox the name of the game, in my opinion, when it comes to just farming successfully, is getting as in tune with your place as possible. Your local area, your sources of carbon, whether that's wood chips or compost or manure, like you're saying, the geology of your region, where you live, like what creates that sort of terroir of your place and how your crops are going to thrive. And a soil test and a tissue test, those are two, in my opinion, very powerful tools, but they're just two. Your eyes, your ears, your smell, your curiosity, all of that plays into it.
I love it. I love it. Um, are you seeing like severe differences from season to season in your soil testing?
Generally not. So what I see is in topsoil, I see the same pattern, absolutely the same pattern. Um, Sometimes I'm writing almost the same recommendation year after year. For example, in a high precipitation environment where a soil is sandy, a lot of those nutrients just are leached through the soil profile with all the winter rainfall. And so the same amendments are kind of needed every year. Um, there are things that are immobile that start to accumulate over time, but there's a lot of soils where you're sort of seeing the same pattern. Also, my recommendations aren't really aggressive, so I'm just kind of slowly moving the soil chemistry with organic amendments. So oftentimes you have to do the same thing like, you know, 5 times before you're actually moving the needle. Um, that's kind of like how responsible nutrient management is done. So you're not applying too much of one thing, trying to hit a target level, and then creating a bunch of solubility that ends up in waterways and things. So it's I like to say walk, don't run. I think it's better to just sort of slowly move a topsoil toward optimal balance. Also, it's like steering an ocean liner. There's 2 million pounds in the top 6 inches of topsoil. So the amendments you put down are kind of like they're minimal in terms of the general greater trend or pattern chemically. Now, in a peat-based media, they can swing a lot faster. You can move nutrient levels in an engineered media very quickly, which is yeah. it's kind of fun in a way. So those you're seeing, if someone reuses their soil like 10 rounds in a row, you're going to see the same pattern usually. Like usually nitrogen and potassium and manganese will kind of be depleted first, but it's all over the board because people are using all kinds of different inputs, some of which are creating massive excesses. So
Mm-hmm.
the peat-based medias jump around a lot.
As a soil doctor, do you see a lot of toxicities in a lot of these people who are playing with the peat-based potting mix?
You know, I see, I don't know, I don't see toxicities as much as I see excesses that lead to nutrient antagonisms that show up as physical like deficiency symptoms in a plant. So I see a lot of like sodium excess or chloride excesses, actually magnesium excesses. I mean, if you think about it, only like 0.5% of the leaf material is magnesium compared to, let's say, 5% calcium. So it's a 10x difference in plant uptake of calcium versus magnesium. So it's easy to over apply magnesium and create this imbalance where there's so much magnesium in your soil, the plant's not uptaking even a fraction of that, the amount you're applying, which then starts to tie up other nutrients. People call it lockout in the cannabis world, but really what it is like the plant is, competing for uptake with potassium and calcium. So I see a lot of excesses that lead to issues. Absolutely. High salts, things like that. And that is more in peat-based medias, partially because usually they're protected under plastic or in an indoor environment. So the rainfall's not leaching out excesses. Part of it's just that mineral soils, like I said, there's just more volume and there's more cation exchange capacity on the clay colloid that sort of absorbs and, I don't know, puts those nutrients into equilibrium or into unavailable forms, kind of into the parent material of the rock. And people generally in a 10-gallon pot or a 15-gallon pot are going to feed super heavily. So it's a lot easier to overdo things when you're relying so heavily on supplemental nutrition.
Oh yeah, I see more people love their plants too much than not love them enough, for sure.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like,
And this issue, I will say, in agriculture in general, it's amazing, even field crop production, it's amazing how many things are applied that aren't needed. And every time you apply something that's not needed, it's well, A, financially it makes no sense, but it will often create an antagonism. It's like the analogy another agronomist uses is it's like putting your foot on the gas and the brake at the same time. So it's just like it's a really inefficient way to manage soils and plants. Um, anyway,
and it's ecologically irresponsible because a lot of those minerals are soluble, water soluble. Like you said, they'll leach out and then get into our waterways. And that's why we have the die off every year in the Gulf of Mexico because of over application of nitrogen, phosphorus. And we just see, we could be smarter, get those soil tests and like because that's not cannabis, that's just conventional agriculture that just overdoes it all the time, and it's not going to lead to more produce. It's just leading to more pollution and I guess a waste of money. But
yeah, yeah.
that,
No, you're exactly right. There's like soluble phosphorus in waterways is one of the worst things ever. It's like incredibly toxic because it's so nutritious. It creates these blooms and then the oxygen level goes down, everything dies. So, yeah, you're 100% right. I think, yeah, in the sort of the Corn Belt the Mississippi basin where those issues are bad, it's a combination of rate, so they're applying too much, but it's also the wrong form. So oftentimes they're applying a conventional nitrogen that's super soluble. Organically, you can totally over apply nitrogen, and phosphorus, but it's way, way harder than if you're using a more soluble form that's not attached to carbon. They're doing it at the wrong time. So they might be doing it before a big rainfall event. And they're often applying like the wrong placement. So there's sort of four issues at play, and yeah, it's hard to watch.
yeah, Yeah. So this is a perfect segue. Let's get into it. I want to go nitrogen cycle first because we're going to be in that vegetative phase. It's almost stopped snowing here, hopefully, um, and getting into the outdoor growing season. So let's talk nitrogen because you posted something on Instagram a long time ago, and that's how I found you or started following you, is like something that you post about the various forms of nitrogen and how your plant actually takes it up and which form's better than the other. So dive
Cool.
in.
Yeah, sure. By the way, where do you live? That where it's still snowing?
Eastern Washington,
Oh, cool.
Spokane.
I
Yeah.
love Eastern Washington. Um, I'll get into the nitrogen cycle, but I actually I wanted to move to Eastern Washington. I think it's one of the most fertile places in the U.S. with great groundwater and like, I was thinking more like Walla Walla, but
Okay. Yeah,
anyway,
we're in the midst of moving to Valley Ford, so south of Spokane, right before the Palouse, and
cool.
12-acre farm. I'm so excited to get out of the suburbs. It's like raw. They just have cattle. They
Oh
rent the
yeah, the
field for
Palouse
cows.
is one of the
So,
most fertile areas ever. Yeah.
oh yeah.
Um, okay, so yeah, to get back to nitrogen, so um, nitrogen's unique as a nutrient in that there are various forms that are plants available. So the two inorganic forms, meaning not attached to carbon, are nitrate and ammonium. That's typically what's tested on a soil test, and they have wildly different effects on the plant. Um, some agronomists have even argued like they should be thought of as different nutrients, even though they're both nitrogen. So conventionally, you can apply nitrate sources or ammonia-based sources of nitrogen, and they both do different things to the soil, to the microbiology, and to the plants. There's a third form of nitrogen, which um, people it's an organic, it's a carbon-based source of nitrogen. A lot of people know them as amino acids, but the family is a little larger. It can be complete proteins, amino acids, peptides, any carbon-based nitrogen source, and way more common in well-managed soils. All the organic nitrogen amendments we apply are these carbon-based molecules. So when we apply alfalfa meal, I love alfalfa meal. It's like one of my favorite sources of nitrogen. It's a it's a it's a complete product, and the microorganisms enzymatically break it into proteins, and then they digest it even further into amino acids. And those really small amino acids are plant available. So the plant can uptake amino acids, and it is true that plants can actually also uptake microbes, whole microbes. I personally think it's a very minor and insignificant um, nitrogen pathway, but the point is the plant can uptake these carbon-based sources of nitrogen, which are preferable metabolically. They're much more efficient for the plant because when a plant uptakes nitrate, it has to send it through a pathway that takes a ton of energy and complexes it back into amino acids and protein to put into the cells and the leaves. So if it doesn't have to go through the nitrate reductase pathway, it saves a bunch of metabolic energy. So in general, the best and most advantageous source of nitrogen is an amino acid. And so growers often apply amino acid nitrogen from soybean meal or fish. There's a bunch of different brands, but they're all like soluble in water, but they're amino acids. I'd also add that liquid fish has a lot of amino acids in it, like liquid fish hydrolysate. Um, but I would actually go further to say that you don't want one source or the other. You actually want a diversity of nitrogen sources. So you want your plant uptaking amino acids and nitrate and even a little bit ammonium. So what happens is in that cycle, you apply the alfalfa meal, the microbes turn it into amino acids, which the plant can uptake. But very, very quickly, a different set of microorganisms is taking the amino acids, eating them, and converting them into ammonium. And then a different family of microbes is taking the ammonium and consuming it and turning it into nitrate. And so it's sort of a one-way street in a well-aerated soil, at least. It can go in reverse, but only in very weird circumstances. So the nitrogen you apply goes from amino acids to ammonium to nitrate. And at each stage, those sources of nitrogen are available to the plant. And in my opinion, you want carbon-based nitrogen constantly flowing through that system in different stages so your plant can uptake all three forms at the same time. The research is totally limited on organic nitrogen management, but the conventional nitrogen management shows that in cannabis production, you get sort of the best optimal yield plant health, plant characteristics at 80% nitrate and 20% ammonium, but they're completely avoiding, and there's no amino acids or carbon-based nitrogen in that study whatsoever. So really, I would expect it to be like at least 50% amino acids, the rest nitrate and a little bit of ammonium. You can't really optimize to that degree. The idea is just use organic amendments. It's always better to, if you have the time or the labor, to apply small amounts, top dressed or in liquid feeds, as opposed to a single huge dose all at one time, because you're keeping the nitrogen in those three different forms consistently through the season. That's kind of a long answer to your short question, but
No, that was a great explanation of how nitrogen is being taken up by the plant. So what do you think of neem meal?
so neem meal, I mean, all of the meals are essentially just like these nitrogen protein meals. And I know that neem meal has always been very popular in cannabis production. Mostly, I think it's been more popular 10 years ago than it is today. I think Coots Mix maybe has a bunch of it in there. Anyway, I've never used it. I don't have a strong opinion of it. Um, I've met growers who really don't like it, but then I work with growers all the time who use it. So what I do when I write recommendations is people get to choose what their preferred nitrogen amendments are, and I just customize my recommendations based on that. Personally, I like in my typically I'm using a combination of alfalfa meal, sometimes soybean meal, which are slow releasing. So the carbon to nitrogen ratio of all these amendments varies. And so blood meal is going to be super fast and highly available compared to alfalfa meal, which is going to be slow. So it's going to kind of provide a slow releasing source of nitrogen for a longer period of time. And so I like a diversity of release rates. So I like alfalfa meal being slow. I really like a product it's granular poultry manure. Um, so I like granular poultry manure. I like a brand called Perfect Blend. Um, and I sometimes use soybean meal. And then sometimes if I need to move the needle fast and my plants are hungry, well, if my plants are hungry, I'm going to do a liquid feed. But if I want fast availability, I actually like blood meal. There's sort of issues with each of these products, um, but I rarely use neem meal to answer your question, so I don't have a
Okay.
strong opinion.
I just really like how it smells and its IPM properties. It smells like Indian food.
It is from India. That's funny. Um, yeah, I mean, I've used neem oil for like sprays, but yeah. I mean, people tend to use neem with karanja. I don't know why. That combo always seems to be
Yeah, I have.
supposed
I've
to go
never used
together.
Karanja, but um, I just had a good hookup on neem meal, so I wanted your opinion on it. But
Yeah, I think
cool.
it's on the slower. What I like about it is it's on the slower releasing side
Mm-hmm.
of the spectrum, which I think is good based on kind of that constant flow of carbon-based nitrogen I was talking about. You want slow releasing sources for sure as kind of your base, and compost can act as that too. A good compost can also be just a slow releasing source of nitrogen as well.
Yeah, let's talk about compost. Are you composting on your farm, and how much are you? I mean, when you're producing it yourself, it's like barely enough probably for what you've got going on.
Well, so I do two things with compost. Well, I'm constantly, if I see a source of manure, I I'm bringing it onto my farm. So I have huge piles of horse manure that have just been sitting there composting. I have huge piles of chicken manure, which these are like factory chickens, but um, it's composted. It's allowed in organic production. It's the quantity I need for my orchard, but I let it sit for another 2 years after I get it delivered, and I let it keep composting and maturing and aging and hopefully getting more organisms. And then what I do personally from a compost making standpoint is I do something called a Johnson Su bioreactor, and they're supposedly the kind of the like gold standard for creating like a well-aged, balanced fungal dominant compost. So I'm building more of those this year, and um, yeah, I'm actually still getting those set up. So
How
that's
many
kind
do
of
you
the
have so
idea.
far?
Say it again.
How many do you have so far?
I just have one sitting out there. It's not even full yet. My issue is I'm in the dry desert, and so it doesn't make sense for me to compost until those piles have really good irrigation. So I'm like putting in this irrigation system around an entire zone of my farm for compost. So I have all the materials, but they're dry and they're not doing anything, and so I need to put the irrigation in. And once that's in, I'll build another probably like I think I want 4 total. I'll just be using that mostly for extracts. So I'll just fertigate compost extracts.
Amazing. I love the Johnson Su bioreactor. That's one of my first projects I'm going to get started as soon as we move to the farm. Man, those things. I traveled the country looking at soil samples under the microscope for people. I probably looked at hundreds and hundreds, maybe 1,000 by the time this class was over. And there was one person who brought in Johnson Su compost, and it was an explosion, a party of like the most amazing diversity of organisms. It was the most alive sample I had seen under the microscope, and I was like, what is this? Like, what do you got going on? He brought his whole, like, it was like a 75-year-old man, and he had like all of these photos that he did these side-by-side testing of extracts of the Johnson Su, and he sprayed it on half of the tree, and you could see like half the tree was like huge and the other side was like much smaller, and he did this through like all of these experiments, and I was just like blown away. So I went down the rabbit hole. The
Yeah,
Johnson Su
cool.
bioreactor, really fucking
Yeah, I
cool.
mean, I don't have direct experience like that, but it seems to be the gold standard for people who pay attention to like the biological diversity of compost. It's kind of striking to me that it creates such a good product. It's so simple. It's really, really simple. It's just a pile with kind of a cylindrical hole in the middle. I mean, to me, aging, like part of it is just like when you age a compost and you keep it aerated and moist for a year, the biggest issue with compost, in my opinion, not only from a chemistry standpoint, but from a biological standpoint, is these commercial facilities, they move it so quick. They flip it 6 times and they produce it so quickly, and they're just trying to get it out the door because if you think about it, they're trying to sell product. But any good compost has to be well aged. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that's probably the worst, or the biggest limitation in quality compost is just age.
Oh yeah, I know. My husband's like, I think it's so funny that you compost all this and then it's sitting there for 2 years and we don't even use it. I'm like, it needs to
Yeah,
age.
exactly.
It's
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, it's like a fine wine. So yeah,
exactly.
I'm doing that. I mean, I've only applied the poultry manure compost, which is awesome. I mean, from a nutrient standpoint, that stuff is amazing. I can't say that the other properties, my sense is it's not that good. But from an organic carbon-based nutritional standpoint, I actually love chicken manure. Um, yeah. So anyway, that's all I've done so far. But I've got stuff in the works. Everything takes time.
Oh yeah, but that's amazing that you've got the space that you're setting it up. I'm always telling people, yo, get the free poop.
Yeah, yeah.
Poopdrop.com. I think that's out there. If it isn't, somebody
Yeah,
make
yeah.
it.
Well, they have chip drop, so they should have poop drop. Yeah, I mean, what I do is you can get a compost analysis on manure or compost on my website. It's a $70 test that Logan Labs does, and I do a free recommendation because I just want to see more compost. Um, every single horse manure I can find, or llama, or anything I can find in my area, I test it, and if it looks good, I'll pay whatever I need to get it delivered.
Have
Um,
you looked at alpaca poo testing?
I have seen, not in my area, but I've seen tests on alpaca for sure. I have a whole database of compost tests. I don't remember what I saw, but I've,
I
I
just
know
hear
it's
that the
generally good.
alpaca, yeah, I've heard good things. Um, Well, that's really great. I love to hear that. I'm all about closing those loops, turning waste into a product, saving money. It just makes sense. Like if you're not using poop, what are you doing?
The other thing I like
Um,
about it is you're developing local relationships. So many of the inputs I use just come from all over the place, and to me, there's something about shaking the hand of the person who delivers it and just having it's like a more resilient local community and supply chain. And like when you really think about like regeneration of land, it's all about your local place. So to me, when you're sourcing fertility from your neighbor or from just someone in your area like that, there's a lot of power in that. Even if it's like, for example, the chicken manure, it's like ah, tough for me to see how those chickens are produced, but that's the issue that's in my backyard that I should be looking at directly, because like that's what I have power over addressing. And I also like think that the relationship with the guy who's scooping the poop and like producing the chickens, even if I don't agree with his practices, that's a valuable relationship.
Definitely. You never know. Like one day you build this relationship and like you have a conversation and maybe you say something that inspires him or incites some kind of positive change, because we don't even know how much we impact one another. And, maybe his chickens will end up having a little bit better of a life because of something that you said down the road. You
Totally,
never know.
totally. No, that's that's
Um,
that's my point for sure.
so the last episode I just dropped was regenerating your soil and your community, because I believe regenerative agriculture, it encompasses your community, and the better you are to the people around you, it's just building. It's a whole closed loop cycle in and of itself. It's a positive feedback loop. So I love that you said that. um let's talk, because we're already almost at an hour, so I want to hear now transitioning. So we've got all of our different various forms of nitrogen. We want ammonium nitrate, amino acids, we want long lasting, we want foliar feeds if you need it.
Totally.
What's your favorite for your for foliar feed of nitrogen? I was
Nitrogen.
gonna say fish,
So
but
the most efficient uptake of nitrogen happens with amino acids. It goes amino acids, urea, which is a conventional form, and so literally the organic option is the most efficient. So even conventional like broadacre crop growers in Canada and the Midwest are using amino acids for foliars because um, the number that I've learned is it's 7 times more efficient if you can get a nitrogen molecule in via foliar as an amino acid than root applied. So essentially, 1 pound per acre of foliar applied nitrogen is equal to 7 to the soil. So I'm a huge fan of foliar nitrogen, and I think, yeah, soluble amino acids. I use a brand called the Grower Secret Nitrogen because it's the least expensive. It's still crazy expensive for a 50-pound bag, but yeah, I mean, that said, so that's my favorite source. That's what I'd recommend. Fish-based amino acids are fine. Liquid fish hydrolysate is also fine for foliar. A lot of amino acids and other beneficials in there. But I'm also unique, definitely in the cannabis community around foliars, where I do them, but I'm kind of skeptical, and I don't think you need them. So I've like grown amazing cannabis, I've just grown amazing crops without any foliars. So I just think plants evolved primarily to uptake nutrients through their roots, and my bias is soil, so I think that foliars are great for an emergency rescue. They have their purpose. I mean, every crop there's like an optimal way to use foliars, but at the end of the day, I don't think about feeding my plant through foliar. I usually just think soil applied stuff.
okay, yeah, I would have to agree. I mean, I do some foliar through vegetative, but typically it's, not a ton of nutrients. It's more like aloe, yucca, maybe
Exactly.
bacillus, like those
Exactly.
kinds of
So
things.
that I
Kelp.
mean, most of the foliars I do are either microbes or biostimulants. Um, maybe sometimes micronutrients, but even still, like I don't even expect that to move the needle. It's more what you're talking about. It's more
I have
stimulating
heard
photosynthesis.
or read studies basically that nitrogen is highly effective as a foliar application, but some of these other things that we're applying, like specifically calcium, when I see people applying
Yeah,
calcium as a
exactly.
foliar, because it is such a large molecule size, plus it's it's a cation, and then our leaves surface has a little bit of an electrical charge, that it actually, when you're applying it a foliar, it may not be as effective, you know as other uptakes, I guess. Not nitrogen. Nitrogen is great, but calcium specifically is the one that, and I don't remember the study, but I was just
Yeah.
reading, trying to play devil's advocate, because I was like pro foliar, but I want to know the other side too. What are people saying?
Yeah, that's exactly how I kind of go. And so, yeah, I mean, like you said, nitrogen. I find that magnesium, like an Epsom salt foliar, can be very effective. Those two, I'm a real big fan of. Um, but when it comes to all the micronutrients, calcium, um, even potassium, the only way that they'll make it into the plant is if they're chelated. And so like amino chelated is a great way to do it. You can do that with a compost extract. Any way to chelate those nutrients is going to increase the uptake efficiency. But to buy an amino chelated calcium is super expensive. So at that point, if you do the math, there's no way you can get 5% of the leaf tissue to be calcium through foliars. I mean, it's like not even mathematically, it's just a tiny drop in the bucket. So that's the other reason is it's like you're kind of at that point doing an emergency rescue because the majority of calcium is going to be coming through the roots no matter what.
All right. So there you have it, folks. The soil doctor dropping knowledge. And I do have recipes for foliar applications. Um, check out my Patreon. All kinds of recipes on there for foliar or nutrient teas. In fact, throughout the conversation, fish had been brought up multiple times. And if you're an avid fisherman or woman, I highly suggest you and recommend you consider making your own fish fertilizer. So, as it's a amazing natural source of nitrogen. And last year, I had the pleasure of teaching a class alongside KNF guru Chris Trump, where he shared his insights on IPMO, which is super fascinating and interesting. And we'll get into that in the IMO or in the IPM episode. Various IMOs as well as fish amino acids. So this is a type of KNF, Korean natural farming fish fertilizer. And I have a bucket that I've been aging for nearly a year. It'll definitely be going into the garden and this year. So stay tuned, check it out on Instagram, YouTube. And if you are interested in taking that class, it's available on my website. 3 hours of recorded class time with me, Chris Trump, and tons of complimentary material, recipes, articles, etc. To go with that, use code FISH for 20% off. Now, fish are an amazing source of nitrogen. Obviously, that's why there's fish hydrolysate, fish amino acids, fish fertilizers. Interestingly, and Native Indigenous Americans would bury fish carcasses with their when they're planting their corn. Throw in the fish, and that would be enough, especially for corn, which is a really high feeding nitrogen. Likes a lot of nitrogen. So one of the largest nitrogen cycles, transfers of nitrogen that occurs in the natural world is the salmon spawn. So these massive fish spend 4 years out at sea accumulating nutrients, and then they swim back upriver to their ancestral spawning grounds to die and be eaten by various animals. So over the last 100 years, we've seen a huge loss in salmon populations, and this is due to overfishing as well as the installation of dams. I don't know if you know this, but 98% of the rivers in America have been dammed to the detriment of our fish. Now, while these hydroelectric dams seemingly produce clean energy, their impacts can be seen on a wide range of species. And I think this is an excellent reminder for us to consider, again, our actions and how they trickle down and affect the ecosystem around us. This is why I teach holistic and ecological gardening, because everything we do has an impact on the natural world. So, and then in a previous episode with Jeff Lowenfels, we discussed briefly the impact of climate change and how not even dams, but just the difference in he was speculating that it was the lack of mosquitoes, but the lack of the fish spawning up into these streams and rivers in Alaskan forests. The lack of these fish getting upstream, dying, and then feeding the forests are resulting in less nitrogen available for tree health, and this is leading to weaker trees that are more susceptible to wildfires. So it's this whole cascade of things that just being aware of. And then not only the ecological impact, but over fertilization or losing nitrogen to runoff. Like if you see a runoff, if you're in a pot and you see runoff, that runoff has contains mobile nutrients in it, and that is just a waste of money, right? It's just washing away all of your money, your fertilizer out the drain. Um, and sustainability, again, I'm going to remind you, isn't just about saving the planet and the animals and plants and stuff. It's also about your economic, like you as the gardener, you are the most important piece of this puzzle. And so like, why would you want to just waste money, right? And so that's why we talk about like the proper application, when to apply them, don't apply before a huge rainfall, etc. Um, so not only are farmers losing money when they see nitrogen and phosphorus washing away, but of course they're accumulating in our waterways and causing huge die-offs, killing aquatic species. And this is because it basically high concentration of nutrients starts algal blooms, which then depletes oxygen, which then results in the mass die-offs of aquatic species that rely on that, that nitrogen or oxygen. Obviously, life, you got to breathe. And so I just want to give a shout out to, again, the Humboldt Seed Company. Not only are they sponsoring Blaze, our Grow Along citizen science project, but they're fish. The founder, Nate, is a freshwater biologist, and they're working with local California indigenous tribes to revitalize the natural salmon spawning grounds in Humboldt by supporting dam removal and habitat restoration. Over the last 50 years, 60 years of cannabis cultivation in the backwoods of Humboldt and the Emerald Triangle, a lot of streams were impacted, and I went to a Wild and Scenic Film Festival that discussed the implications that cannabis cultivation and logging have had on salmon spawning. And it's just amazing to see them making an effort to righting wrongs that were made not by them specifically, but other cultivators in the area, and just giving back to their community. That's really what this is all about. These are good people. I've said it before. I'll say it again. And there is some more drama going on if you're a part of the online cannabis community, Instagram, blah, 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 surrounding their new triploid strains, which we are growing for Blaze. We'll do an update for that soon. But this drama revolves around the incidents of several indoor growers claiming an excessive amount of hermaphroditic traits in those triploid strains. So I did take the time to reach out to Ben again after these allegations, and we discussed in more detail why this could have happened. And that is available to all Patreons, Friends of Blaze included. So Friends of Blaze is the $3 a month tier that just supports the podcast, the Citizen Science Project, and helps fund this, because this is just me and Cat Lady doing this out of the goodness of our hearts, trying to contribute to cannabis science and get more folks growing outside and having this database of information to create outdoor growing zones. And we wouldn't be able to do this without the Humboldt Seed Company, sponsoring all of these seeds. But we are growing the triploids and the diploids. And so I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that. If you want to sign up for Friends of Blaze, you'll get access to that interview. And I appreciate all of the support, each and every one of you, just by listening, sharing, liking, subscribing. Technically, the amount of hermaphrodites only occurred in indoor grows and was out of like 6,000, like 3% or something. And he has several reasons and speculations as to why there could have been herming going on in these indoor scenarios. But it's worth giving a listen, and we will have the data collected after an entire season of growing. I think that we have about 50 participants in Blaze this year that are all growing the triploid donut strain next to the diploid. So we will be collecting this data and can give you guys feedback at the end if we see any herms. I just think that there has been a ton of controversy surrounding this company and saying that they're money grabbing. They don't have the best interest of the community at large. And I would have to disagree. They're great, good friends, family owned business that do a lot to give back to the community. That's my opinion on it, and we'll see what happens. Science is so interesting, and I'm really excited that we have the opportunity to collect data with all of our scientists, and share with you through the podcast what we find. Now, I did talk about the controversy also a little bit earlier. Remember when I talked about iron EDTA and how that chelating agent can kill microbial life? And so that's really where we get that synthetic versus organic. At least in my mind, that's kind of where like the difference, or why I'm choosing organic inputs over synthetics, is because of ecological impacts. Obviously, there's a time and a place for conventional farming in areas that don't have access or labor, because organic farming is highly labor intensive, and we have over 8 billion people in the world. And so without the workforce, the education, and the know-how, we wouldn't be able to feed the world without using some of these synthetic nutrients. At least that's what they tell us, right? We don't really know. I mean, I guess for sure, but there's like beef on in the cannabis community all the time, and I think that we need to remember why we're all growing this plant and come together more in a positive way, instead of my way is better than your way. Synthetic grown is cardboard terps. There's this attack from both sides of organic versus synthetic, and I think it's so silly, because we are here trying to grow medicine that can have a really amazing positive impact on the planet and our community and just the society at large. And so I am doing a special episode that is not, it's going to be probably featured on YouTube with the Shark Mouse Farms. And he is an indoor synthetic grower. And we had this idea, check him out, Shark Mouse Farms on Instagram, to have a conversation about the differences of synthetic and organic, because he is a wealth of knowledge in synthetic indoor cultivation. He comes from science-backed, he's always citing scientific papers and doing things, trying to push the envelope of his knowledge and content creation. And I think it's important for us to be able to have these positive dialogues that aren't attacks and saying one way is better than the other. Obviously, we're outdoor organic growers over here, but I want to be a person that opens up positive dialogue between different mindsets, because I think that empathy is the thing that is lacking most in the world. And that means being able to see things from another perspective. And oftentimes in this age of social media, we have these echo chambers that are giving us what is that? That bias, that confirmation bias that is telling us that what we think is right, we're hearing it, we're having it repeated through the social media echo chambers. And it's important to step aside from what you think and being open to having conversations with people who have different opinions than you. And what I see right now in the world is this huge division between different opinions. And it's okay to have different opinions. It's okay to not agree with everyone and not attack and take it personally and act like a turd, right? Like I love poop, y'all, but don't act like turds. So, I will have updates soon. Subscribe to YouTube, Instagram. Friends of Blaze is going to give you the most information. You'll have the most updates on Patreon, and it's only $3 a month, and it really helps me and Cat Lady, pay for everything. So that will be exclusive interview live for Patreon members with Shark Mouse Farms. And it should be a really interesting conversation to have. And I'd like to continue having dialogues with people who do things differently than me, because maybe it's not going to change how you do something, but it could let you understand why someone does something the way they do. So, all right, enough of that side tangent. Now let's do a drum roll, please, for the Blaze Grow Along updates. Technical difficulties. We finally have our seeds. Most of our growers are scientists. It was crazy to get the seeds because the Humboldt Seed Company has been selling out like so quickly. And that's the problem that happened when they first posted seeds online. We were supposed to get from the first batch, and they didn't realize that they would sell out so quickly. So we were supposed to be growing the OG Kush strain. They sold out so fast that they only had a couple dozen left. And we have 50 participants, and they're donating 3 seeds per person. And not only the triploid variety, but the diploid. So we switched to the donuts because the second round of seed harvesting was much better for the donuts. And honestly, I am really excited to grow the donut strain. It's fast flowering time, like 45 days, gassy, sweet glazed donuts, terps. So most of our scientists have received their free seeds. So thank you, Humboldt Seed Company, for donating to science. We have participants in all locations over the country, all over the country, different hardiness zones, different latitudes. And our first survey went out asking questions. So once a week, we'll have a survey that asks, okay, so what date did you start? Did you germinate? How did you germinate? And they're mostly yes or no questions, because if you're trying to gather data, like a yes or no question is much better to get. And then there's room for extrapolation and discussing your response. But our hopes, right? We're going to be taking and collecting so much information, and then Cat Lady and I are analyzing it and putting it through a machine learning process to try to map out different gardening zones. And we're able to do this because we are all growing the same strain, but there's that added layer, that dimension of having the triploid versus diploid, which is going to let us see, is it really growing much faster, bigger? Is our yield different? Is it more pest resistant? What's the difference between the triploid and the diploid? And then, how are these photo periods, regardless of triploid or diploid, growing in different latitudes? Or is it significant changes in their flowering time? When are we seeing pistils, pre-flowers, all kinds of data? So very exciting. Our first year, our inaugural year. And I'm doing it up at my new farm, the Bad Seed Farm. So again, tune in on Friends of Blaze, Patreon, check in on the YouTube, my website, Queen of the Sungrown, for the newsletter, sign up, and, follow along and see what we're doing here. And of course, subscribe to Sungrown Stories and share with your nerdy friends that like stuff about gardening, weed, ecology, Mother Earth, all of those things. So this episode, I want to give a shout out to the soil doctor. Thank you so much for joining us today. And Cat Lady for holding it down while I was through my car accidents and moving. And this episode was written by me, produced by Cat Lady, and Obtine Yeager. Thank you, Obtine, for being so awesome. And congratulations on graduating college, dude. Hells yeah. And next week, I will see you here, and we'll hopefully be discussing the price of pot. But who knows? Might change it up. You'll just have to tune in to see. And I look forward to that. Happy gardening, and I will talk to you next week. Choosing her sin every morning, choosing to be